Welcome to week 3, video 4. Today, we're going to be exploring German Expressionism. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you about a couple things that have been on my mind concerning online instruction. I really want this to be an interactive experience for you. And therefore, I have placed moments of pauses in the videos. And I really want you to honor those so that you have a moment to reflect on what's being said and, of course, a moment to take some notes. I also want to let you know that I've placed these videos onto YouTube because there's a closed caption feature you can use to help you take those notes. And then finally, I want to discuss with you the discussion questions. I find them to be an extremely important part of the course. So you might be ahead of everyone else when you write up your answers. So don't think that you're done, because I really want you to come back to those discussion questions and look to see what your peers have written and what I've written. I post answers as well, just after everybody completes theirs. So please do take a look at those, because those are going to help grow your mind. And it'll give you new ideas and broaden your own thoughts. So find a way to carve out a little bit of time to look at those discussion questions. Okay, so talking about interaction, we're going to start off this video differently. What I'm going to do is show you 8 paintings. And each painting stays up for about 4 seconds. So you're going to want to pause the video and really digest those paintings through your senses. And then take a couple of moments to write, maybe 1 minute and 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And then go on to the next painting. Cool? Good. So here is your first painting. You probably came up with the following. You noticed saturated color. Maybe you thought about primary colors. You probably noticed that the flesh tones of the people in the paintings are not quite realistic. I'm sure some of you noticed really harsh lines. And some of the buildings look very sharp. You probably felt some emotion from each of these paintings as well. Some negative, some confusing, some angst-filled. Now, what I'm going to do is go through those paintings and give you some thoughts behind each one. The audio quality will change slightly because I'm going to be using a different program. So I just want to warn you about that in advance. I have selected an overview of German Expressionist art and its artists. This very first street scene taking place in Dresden by Kirchner gives us the feel of a city, the claustrophobia, that hot pink that gets at the heat of a city. But even more so than the claustrophobia and the city itself, I want you to look at the women in it. And this first woman in the foreground with the orange skin. Notice how her hat is filled with flowers. She has this very colorful pashmina or scarf. And then there's this lady behind her with green skin. And you think about that symbolic weight of green, and we get the idea of monstrous, jealousy, illness. And what I'm feeling here is this woman who has less means than the woman in front of her is jealous. And we can see she's seething with rage over it because we see red brushstrokes around this woman's eyes. What I also want to point out is this little girl in the middle of the street with a hat that looks like it has teeth, and this hat will eat her. And I wonder if this girl has been abandoned by the jealous woman who might be her mother. It's just something to think about. Clearly, this is a city filled with anger, and those who have and those who don't. Clearly, there is a similarity between this canvas and the previous one. We're noticing that same green skin color again, but this time it feels as though it's about illness. And I get that idea because of the dark brushstrokes under this woman's eyes. It reminds me of early films where people who are ill get heavy black makeup under the eyes to suggest illness, which we saw in D.W. Griffith's The Country Doctor. Now, I also want to point out this hot pink on her cheek. It reminds me of a wound. It reminds me of blood. And it brings me to her high heel shoes that are the same color. And you think that maybe what we're getting at here is blood on her feet from walking the streets. And that bruise on her face comes from a John. After World War I, Germany had terrible economic conditions, and it forced women into prostitution. And we get that feeling with this painting. In Berlin, it was estimated there was 120,000 women who were prostitutes, and that does not include the 35,000 male prostitutes. You have to understand at this time that 4.2 trillion mark buys $1 US. As we're going through these paintings, I'm also setting up the historical scene for German Expressionist painting, art making, and filmmaking. Here we have this picture of a family by Beckmann. What you notice right away is the skin tone is more natural. It's not a primary color or a secondary color. What I want to point out is how claustrophobic the space is. And there's multiple generations in this tiny apartment. We're going to see claustrophobia come up again and again. But what I want to point out here is notice the amount of women. And I think about how World War I gave women in Germany a lot of independence and freedom. They won the right to vote. There were, I believe, 11 women elected to political office. But with the ending of the war, the women were forced back into the home. Or they had to not only work and make a living, they also had to do all the housework still. So this was a really hard time for women, and it is certainly expressed in this picture, and it shows how hard it is for a family. This painting by Kirchner literally breaks your heart as you look deeper and deeper into it. Kirchner has placed himself in the role of a soldier returning from World War I. So he has an understanding of what this awful experience might be like psychologically for the soldier. And we see this woman behind him who is androgynous. But we get that this soldier will never be able to touch her, to have true intimacy with her in a full way. Houses at night really get at the essence of the German Expressionist style. Notice how all these houses feel sharp and pointed, and it looks like a happy painting by a kid, but notice the last house that is red. Notice how that red bleeds into the street. A house symbolizes family, and so it gives an idea of what the horrors economically could be inside this house. Notice also how harsh the lines are. German Expressionism gets at the harshness of the world, but also all of these houses are filled with emotion. They're expressive, which is a huge part of German artists' work in this movement. This painting by Gross, The Explosion, is so dynamically violent. It looks as though hell has been unleashed in the city. We have this dreamscape of World War I. All of the horrors are clearly in this painting. And again, notice how the buildings are so angular, dagger-like. This self-portrait with Chinese lantern by Sheila really gets at one of the great German Expressionist movement ideas, even though this is Austrian, which is to defy the conventions and norms of beauty. Schiller was anti-bourgeoisie. He is confronting us. He is putting his inner world in front of us. He is looking at us with disdain. A huge part of German Expressionist work is exploring psychology. Psychology is something that is new and something that people are just beginning to delve into. It's becoming part of popular culture, and we get that with this work. I am ending with this painting, Metropolis by Gross, because it summarizes everything we just examined in the other paintings. We see the role of women. We see men with psychological impulses clearly displayed. We see the hot, burning, claustrophobic city, everyone piled on top of each other. We see harsh economic conditions. The final thing I want to say is notice the shadows. This is a dark world. So, let's summarize what I've just talked about, and we're going to add some more information about the German Expressionist movement. So, the artists of the German Expressionist movement were young, just like you. This was a young art movement. And now, not all the artists subscribed to German Expressionism, but their times really influenced all these artists. In the air was German philosophy and these new ideas about psychoanalysis. And these artists wanted to get into the subconscious experience that they're having and that they believe other people might be having. They want to look at the motivations of people, and they want to bring that out of the people that they're putting onto canvas. But not just the people they're putting onto canvas, the buildings even take on emotion or expression as well. So the German Expressionist movement starts sometime around 1905 and goes up through World War II, roughly. And these artists, they're humanitarians. They're also looking into socialism. They want a better world. Now, you didn't just see German Expressionists. Austria was very much a part of this movement too, and there was interaction going back and forth between the artists. So, what these paintings are trying to do is to wake up the bourgeoisie being the middle class. They're you and me. These artists feel that we're too aloof, that we're not looking potentially at the issues that are there. And so by painting in a new way, by painting the expression that's coming deep out of the subconscious or unconscious, they're going to be able to wake up their audience and get their audience to answer questions, to think about and observe the world better. What we're talking about here is revolt. These German Expressionist artists are revolting against institutions. They're even revolting against how art is being made. At their time, you know what? I believe I said 1905. German Expressionism is definitely 1910. So sorry about that. 1910, 1910, 1910. Because what they're revolting against is realism. It is also a pretty new movement, but not as new as German Expressionism. And these artists do not like how realistic art is being made and the subject matter of realistic art. They believe that there are other experiences that a person has that can never be explored through a realistic art practice. And so their ideas about new forms of expression inspire other artists as well. Writers, choreographers, dancers, theater artists, and of course, film.